I love it. All right, Mr. Josh Williams. We tried this already. Last time we recorded an hour and a half conversation. It was absolutely amazing, except I did not press record. So I'm glad to have you back. This is Dr. Josh Williams. For those of y'all who don't know, I'm just going to read you a brief summary about him. Dr. Josh Williams, first off, is a dear friend of mine, a mentor of mine. He has also been a very near and dear counselor to myself. I've had a multitude of counselors who have all been greatly beneficial for me since I was 19 years old, but Josh really was the sledgehammer that God used to just break down some strongholds for me. So um, yeah, he's the sledgehammer guy. So, just a little bit about Mr. Josh Williams. Dr. Josh Williams is a licensed clinical pastoral counselor with advanced certification through the National Christian Counselors Association. He graduated with a degree in pastoral ministry from Family of Faith College in Oklahoma before going on to obtain a master's in biblical counseling and eventually a doctorate in Christian education from Andersonville Theological Seminary. He's also a certified temperament counselor through the NCCA, not to be mistaken with the NCAA. Josh has over 20 years of experience in ministry, education, and relationships, and he has served as a teacher, middle and high school principal, worship leader, pastor, and counselor. So, Mr. Josh Williams, thank you for coming on the Man Meets God show and being our inaugural, how do you say that? Inaugural guest.
Good. Good. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, Mitch, and I'm just honored to be your first guest to kick the show off again. But look, the first time was just practice, right? That's kind of
Yeah,
like parenting. Your first child is just practice, right? So that was just practice for us, and so we're ready to go. But I'm honored to be here, and this is a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it.
cool. So Josh and I, we worked together at a school in Fort Worth, Lake Country. And so we worked together for, it was either 3 or 4 years. I guess 3.5 years is how long we worked together. And so one of the things was, so back then, you were not a counselor. And,
Right.
but I could tell that you had a gifting that made you very in tune with other people. And that was the thing that was very interesting. With all the other counselors that I had, and again, they were great, and they were there for the time in that time of life where I needed them. I needed one that was just very empathetic, and all she was just empathetic for me. But you
Mhm.
have a particular ability that I would even call a spiritual gifting to be able to see into the emotional needs and temperamental needs, which we'll get into in a minute, and to be able to help kind of deconstruct some of those things and then reconstruct a healthier lifestyle. So, if you could just share could you share just a little bit of your journey from ministry and education to becoming a licensed clinical pastoral counselor and just kind of what that transition looked like and why you decided to differentiate between I'm a pastor who counsels and being a licensed clinical pastoral counselor? If you could break that down for us.
Absolutely. So, born and raised in a small town in Oklahoma, very faith-based Christian family. The youngest of four boys. Grew up. My dad was a teacher. Mom was worked nights, and but mom and dad were always involved in ministry. When I was a sophomore, my dad became a pastor. At that same time, I had decided to transition from the school he taught at, the public school, to a Christian school, and that was a big life changing event for me. I really found kind of myself, my identity, my groove, if you will. So I ended up going to high school there and to college there. Um, and just ministry was a thing for me. I learned to lead worship, was, going on missions trips, leading missions trips, been to South America 4 times, all of these things that just were great. But once college ended, it was almost like, what now? And when a church wasn't waiting, decided to go into
Mm.
education, and the doors kind of flew wide open. But in that time of going into education, and then getting married and life's beginning, and um, I found myself really struggling and I shouldn't be struggling, right? I've never
Mm.
really done a prodigal son walk. I mean, I'm not judging anyone that has, but I never really left the faith. I never really went out into the world. I never really dated around. I never drank alcohol. Didn't say a cuss word till I was 36. I just was. This might be a story that a lot of people can't identify with, except
Mm.
that being in education for a long time, in my mid 30s, finding myself just with debilitating problems, addiction. If I could have had access to harder stuff, I would have. But my addiction that was easy access was, food and, pornography. And of course, you can't talk to anybody about that. I would try to tell
Mhm.
people about, hey, I'm really struggling here and I can't stop my mind. My mind is just running all the time and I can't stop it. And,
Mm.
I just believe in going to Christian, church leaders who very ill-equipped, nice people, good people, ill-equipped, and then be like, oh, okay, let's pray more, Josh. Why don't you read and pray more? Let's next, they just didn't
Mm.
know how to help. And finding more and more out that the church, unfortunately, tends to be very uninformed about emotional health, and we're seeing it today, which the stats aren't lying, that 1 in 3, 1 in 4 Americans are clinically diagnosed with anxiety and depression, which we'll talk more about the reasons why that's the case.
Mm.
So hit bottom at 36. I was a principal. I was dealing with all kinds of stress, and so when I hit bottom, um, I got caught, you know, and with some internet browser. Sorry, can't speak. Um, and found myself on the couch of a therapist we both know, Kate Goodell, who is amazing.
Kate the Great.
Expect Kate the Great, she is for sure. And expecting to hear what I'd heard, read more, pray more, quit sinning, put filters on all this, and then to have her look at me and say, "How could you not have addictive behavior? What you grew up in breeds addiction," and that
Mhm.
just blew my world apart. It just blew my world apart because I was raised in what would be considered a picturesque kind of situation.
Mhm.
Now, just a few months before, I had had a conversation with God, like, God, there's no difference in me and someone who's not ever lived a Christian life, not ever read and prayed, not ever been to church. The only difference is I'm going to heaven and they're not, which is great.
Mm.
But I had the same bills. I had the same addictive behavior. I had the same anxiety. I had the same marriage problems. My life is just as miserable as I can imagine theirs are. So what's the
Mm.
point? You know?
Mhm.
And so when I hit bottom in counseling, there was a journey there of just really unpacking um, why all this was happening in my life. And it was like coming out of the matrix. It was like
Mm.
taking the red pill and be like, I've been living in a matrix.
Mm.
So then right before I came to the Christian school you and I were both at, Lake Country, is when I had really had the biggest turn. It's when the tide really turned in my counseling journey. I'd already been in counseling a couple of years, and that's when it turned. And
Mm.
it, it would take a long time to unpack what that entailed. So I found myself at Lake Country and started telling my story, and a lot of people were uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
Even some of the higher up people at Lake Country, like, I wouldn't share that much if I were you. You share a lot, like
Mhm.
about anxiety.
Yeah.
People are embarrassed. You're not supposed to talk about that in church. But I found people that were gravitating to me more about my journey than about
Mm.
my knowledge of the Bible or how to lead worship or spiritual concepts.
Mm.
Um, Even a lot of Nicodemuses that came to me at night. Nicodemus
Yeah.
came to Jesus about the cover of night. Had a lot of cover of night, like, I deal with it too. It was almost like we're a secret, like I deal with anxiety too. It's almost like
Yeah.
you're under the covers and your chilled breath. It's like, I see dead people, right? It's like I
Yeah.
replay things too. I replay them over and over in my mind because I didn't even know what OCD was, and so
Mm.
full blown OCD. I didn't even know what that was.
Mm.
But just the amount of just people just started coming to me, and I started talking with them and helping them, and it was helping.
Mm.
And then, being in contact with my brother Jason, who's a pastor, and said, "Josh, you've got to counsel. You are a counselor. That's what you are." So I found out that I was able to go back and get my license and start this, and so that's what brought us to here. Now, when I started this business, I was teaching and moved back to Oklahoma and teaching, and then it has really
Hmm.
it's exploded. I mean, so I guess that too is just been very fortunate to have I'm a full schedule in just a short amount of time. So
Wow.
with that question,
What a story. And, I think the biggest thing, and I know I've told you this before, but when I worked with you at Lake Country, um, you were very much somebody who was incredibly gifted, but seemed to be bearing a lot of weight on your shoulders. So, um, when you would work through those gifts, and I remember I was one of those cover by night people where I kind of like slid into your office one day and I'm like, you have anxiety too? Okay, like I'm not crazy. We're not supposed to talk about this, which, obviously that's changed a lot in recent years, but even so, still, there's still kind of like this stigma, and the idea is, oh, well, just you need to pray about it. And um, well, obviously, we know, like, obviously, yes, prayer is extremely helpful, and it's more than just helpful; it's the thing that's needed.
sure,
Um, how that parallels kind of with my story, I'm sure that you can relate is, I grew up in a very picturesque family, and my parents loved the crap out of me, and I had two older brothers, and I went to a Christian school, and it's the whole picture. But when I went off to college, the anxiety came crashing in so bad. I didn't even know what it was. Like, I remember when I went to the doctor because I thought I was having heart problems because I could feel my heartbeat for the first time in my life. And I would have a panic attack at 3 in the morning and I thought I was having a heart attack. So I remember when I'm a freshman at Liberty University, my mom schedules me a doctor's appointment because I'm calling them. And I go to this doctor and I describe to him his symptoms. And I remember he asked me, he goes, "Have you ever struggled with anxiety?" And I laughed. I was like, no, that's anxiety is something that I kind of like vaguely heard, like that's for women, that's for weak men, that's for, and I didn't
right,
even know. And it turns out I had actually been struggling with anxiety my entire life because I didn't even know
sure,
what it was. And the
sure,
response, of course, I mean, what do you tell somebody? You tell them to pray. And I remember just praying and praying and praying and praying and praying. And the anxiety wouldn't go away. I would get little respites. I'd get a couple of minutes of peace, and it would just seem to almost like darkness. It would just creep back in. And now, in retrospect, I look back and I see, and I don't want to just go off on my story, but I look back and what I see is the Lord loved me too much to just simply take away, to just solve the symptom. Instead, he was like, I want the cause to be cured. I want to remedy the cause. And so he allowed for the anxiety to stick around in some sense. And that anxiety drove me to find solutions and to go and actually talk about things. And then I come to find out, oh, wow, that actually wasn't healthy. Oh, wow, what I believed about God is actually not true.
it's
It's
true.
actually tainted by some things. And so I guess my question would be, where, how do you define that line between when is it something where you just need to cast all of your anxieties upon him for he cares for you, there's a peace that surpasses understanding, and
Hmm.
okay, I need to go and get some therapist help for this. Like, how do you differentiate that? Because I think there's two extremes, and one would say prayer basically does nothing, go to therapy for everything, don't pray about it. uh, you know,
Sure,
God only helps those who helps themselves. And then there's another side, the super legalistic, just we don't really want to deal with the issue, so let's just slap the Bible on top of it. And that's, well, worry and anxiety is sin, so you need to deal with the worry and anxiety itself, the sin itself. So how do you
sure.
like balance the whole praying about the anxiety and then knowing, okay, this is something I need to like see a counselor or a therapist for?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So, um, we know from Scripture that we are three parts. We are made up. We're triune beings. So, spirit, soul, and body. While there's not a lot overtly in Scripture that defines and describes each one individually, it very much is referenced several places that we are spirit, soul, and body. Um, it's classically believed that your soul is your mind, your will, and emotions. That's a little bit boxy. It's a little bit in the box, but for the purpose of discussion today, we'll go ahead and say your mind, your will, and your emotions is your soul.
Okay.
Um, while your spirit and your soul and your body all overlay very well, we can distinguish them much like we do the systems of our body. You know, the skeletal system, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, we all studied in school, and you can't separate those out and they work independent of each other. But we delineate them out because they have different needs and different functions. And so your spirit, your soul, and your body have different needs and functions. It's easy to categorize them out by
Mm.
their need. Now, if I have a very healthy body, it's going to really help my soul and my spirit. If I have a really healthy spirit, it's going to help my soul and my body. Scripture is clear that it's health to the whole body, it's nourishment to the whole body
Mm.
if you're healthy in your spirit. What we have done is not had a lot of information and teaching on what is the soul, the emotional self, and what the needs are.
Mm.
And one of the reasons is we just live, and this is a little bit of a lengthy, I'll try to condense it. We just live in survival mode. Now, let me tell you that anxiety is a really, really good thing. We're just not supposed to stay there. Depression is a really, really, really good thing. You're not supposed to stay there. If you're stuck in
Mm.
depression, you're stuck in the grieving process. If you're stuck in anxiety, you're stuck in fight or flight.
Mm.
And the front part of your brain is the amygdala, and it is triggered when you sense danger. And so you go into fight or flight. And there's two others now, there's freeze or fawn as well. But you see a bear in the woods, you're going to fight the bear, you're going to flee from it.
Mhm.
Well, in survival mode, we are heightened all the time in anxiety. The amygdala is triggered, we're in fight or flight, and we're not designed to stay in fight or flight. If we stay there too long, our body will start to break down.
Mm.
Things will start to happen like we're seeing happen in our society. Well, America, I love America. I love the United States. I stand and put my hand on my chest for the national anthem. I do. I love
Mm.
our Judeo-Christian principles. I am an American through and through, but we stink at emotions. And the reason is we're just in survival mode. From the Puritans who came here for religious freedom, to the pioneers or the patriots who fought in the Revolutionary War, to the pioneers who settled the West, we are really, really good at getting it done. We're the best probably ever at grit. We fought off the British Empire with just 13 little band of colonies or whatever. We know how to do it, and it fits really, really well into our entrepreneur capitalistic society, which I also love. But it stinks for emotions because what we tend to do is say about emotions things that are true if you're
Mm.
on the Oregon Trail. Suck it up, Buttercup, or I'll give you something to cry about, which is terrible. But it's
Yeah.
true on the Oregon Trail because everything is all the time. It's kind of like that. I was thinking about it on the way here that the animated movie The Croods, right? He's all the time. He's like danger, danger. You know, Nicolas Cage plays the dad. He's just danger. Right? So you just up here all the time. Um,
Mm.
hey, we don't have time for you to cry around. We got to get the wheat in the barn, or we'll starve in winter. We're just things very high stakes, and most of us were parented that way. We were
Mm.
parented. Hey, you're clothed, you're fed, you're safe, you're welcome. Go
Mm.
play, go outside now. And we need so much more than that. So we grow up without understanding emotions. We grow up having these needs, and we can't just say, "Oh, I'm just going to will myself not to need that."
Yeah.
So look, if you cry around on the Oregon Trail, John Wayne will shoot you for that, and he won't think twice. He'll just put a bullet in
Yeah.
your eyes. John Wayne's still the picture of manhood in America. And
Mm.
so what's happening is we're trying to willpower is everything. We celebrate those who have grit and willpower for diet, exercise, the body you want, the life you want, grit and willpower. And that's not how God designed it. Willpower is actually supposed to be the little bitty motor on the front of the boat.
Mm.
Identity power is the big motor on the back of the boat. It's willpower. You have to do things. You have to get. I have to decide to get out of bed. Okay,
Mhm.
willpower gets me out of bed, but after that, identity power starts powering me through the day. But people are burnt out on willpower because that's all they're using because your needs aren't met.
Wow.
And if your needs don't get met, you don't have any identity power because if you break your
Mm.
identity down to the smallest common denominator, it's your needs. You want to take someone's
Mm.
identity away, start not meeting their needs. Well, you can't meet emotional needs with spiritual needs alone. God did not
Mhm.
design for the spirit. You know, people get way off into this ditch. The Bible is everything. It's all we need. Well, if you were caught alone in the desert and all you had was the Bible wouldn't be enough. God, sorry. You need water, you need food, you need shelter. Sorry, I'm
Mm.
not delineating the Bible because I love it. It is the power of God unto salvation, right? It has
Mhm.
everything we need for life and godliness. Unfortunately, we don't get all our emotional needs met in the Bible either. We get it from community. We get it from
Oh, wow.
having fun. We're supposed to do that. So
Mhm.
it's the church has latched on to survival mode because it
Mhm.
fits really well. It lets you be John Wayne if you're in the pulpit. Suck it up and quit doing that. Just will yourself out of fear based. You're going to hell if you do this. You're going to hell if you do this.
Mm.
Survival mode. You're going to die. We're going to die if we do this. You know, savages will get us if we do this, right? So fear based, big sinners in the hands of an angry God. And there was great results from Jonathan Edwards preaching that, great awakening sermon, whatever. That doesn't mean it was done exactly correctly. So the church is latched on to just willpower, crucify the flesh, and so, but still the
Mm.
stats inside the church for emotional health are not any better than they are outside. Anyway,
Wow.
could go on. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Dude, that is so good. So I love something that you just said in there. That as soon as people start hearing, and I understand the reaction, especially growing up in the Bible Belt, and listen, I'm not disparaging the Bible Belt, but especially growing up in the Bible Belt, to hear the Bible isn't all you need, it's like immediately red flags start going up, like, who is this heretic? When
For
reality
sure.
is, I know Josh, I know that he believes in the whole faith, he believes in the infallibility of Scripture and all of that stuff. But what he's saying, I love the analogy you gave. If you're in the desert and all you have is the Bible, you're going to die
Yes.
because you don't have food and water. And so I love how you broke that down. So what you're saying is we have spiritual, emotional, and physical needs. And so you
Yes.
can have all your physical needs met. You can have food and shelter and water and sleep and hygiene, but you can be incredibly unhealthy if you don't have any emotional or spiritual needs met. And so like conversely or related, you could say that so the scripture has everything that we need for our spiritual needs, but scripture also is the guideline, it's the instruction manual on how to also meet those other two needs, the physical and the
Yes.
emotional needs. But so when we try
Yes.
to slap a quote unquote spiritual solution on top of something, then we're not going to get the results that we want. Like if I have diabetes and insulin is available to me, but I say, well, scripture says go anoint your head with oil and be healed. And so instead of taking the insulin, I go and get prayed over and stuff like that. It's like I'm leaving out a very obvious thing that the Lord has given me for that solution. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the scripture gives us guidelines for I can't get my emotional needs met
Hmm.
in an immoral way, right? And we
Yeah.
need to follow that. But that doesn't necessarily mean how I'm going to get my emotional needs met because emotions are vastly different. So generally, everyone's physical needs on earth are pretty much the same: nourishment, rest, and shelter.
Mm.
Everyone's spiritual needs are pretty much the same too. You get your needs met from the scripture. You get your needs met from community. You get your needs met from prayer and relationship with God. Okay, but your emotional needs of everyone are vastly different. That's what makes everyone's we call it temperament. Your emotional hardwiring, your emotional self is vastly different.
Mm.
Some people need a lot of alone time and a lot of tasks. Some people need a lot of relationships and people time. Some people need to be hitting goals a lot. Some people need to be serving people a lot, and those are just some of a list of a lot of emotional needs. There are other people that are way more wired to be in peaceful environments. Some that are wired to be in more chaotic situations.
Mm.
I see one of the things I see people come in and I look at their temperament. It's not my job to make decisions for them, but they are wired for low stakes situations, and they're the CEO of a company or they're an ER nurse. I'm like, an ER nurse, oh my gosh, you can't get more chaotic and high stakes than that, life or death.
Mm.
um, I'm not going to tell you got to do what you got to do, put food on the table, but your wiring is different
Yeah.
than that. So we give, like I said, we give everyone a temperament test, very thorough thing, and we unpack that when they come in for counseling, and it's very, very helpful.
Mm. So, well, that transitions perfectly into what I wanted to ask you. So, there's different approaches to therapy, and most people don't know what temperaments are, and therapy in relation to temperament means. Everybody thinks emotions and personality, not understanding that temperament actually rests underneath the personality, and that's kind of like it's the core in some sense. And so, everybody's probably familiar with I wanted almost said Braxton Hicks. It's because Kenzie's pregnant. Not that. Myers Briggs,
Yeah.
not Braxton Hicks. Everybody's familiar with that. But what inspired you to specialize in temperament therapy, and like how does that differ from other more traditional counseling approaches?
So when I went back and got my license to counsel through the National Christian Counselors Association, that's when I learned about temperament, and I've been like, where's this been all my life? This is what I've been looking for. So temperament has been around for thousands of years. The first one that's credited with two really people, Galen, who was lived in the middle of the Greek Empire a long time ago, and then Hippocrates. Hippocrates is where we get the Hippocratic Oath from. He was a guy way ahead of his time. He was very professional, very observant. He had such a very high standard that he lived by when he treated people. That's where why doctors today raise their hand and say, "I will do no harm." They take the Hippocratic Oath.
Hmm.
But he was observant and he began to realize there's a long story I love. I've studied him thoroughly. But just in a short snippet, he was so observant, he began to realize that people had thrived better in different environments. And he theorized that it was based on the fluid in their body. And so he kind of came up with four different temperaments that were named after bodily fluid. And while he was wrong, he was proven wrong. He was fascinated to know what was going on the inside of a body. They just weren't allowed to look. It was taboo in the Greek Empire to cut open a body.
Hmm.
He would try to run on the battlefield and look at a body, but a mangled corpse doesn't really make a good specimen. He finally illegally he got thrown into prison for his beliefs, and he actually dissected someone in prison illegally, which is fascinating. But he was wanting to know what the inside of the body looked like, and so he just had to go by outward symptoms. And they started to notice that people with the same bodily sicknesses tended to have the same personality traits, which is fascinating as well. So he
Hmm.
theorized about fluid, and he was wrong about the excess of fluid, but he was right that if he determined you were a certain temperament, he would send you to an environment that temperament mandated to have, and they would recover. Like he might send you to a dry, warm climate, or he might send you to a wet, cool climate, and people would recover. So that theory, temperament theory, was called humoral theory. If you research, if you Google humoral theory, that's what it was, because humor is the Greek word for fluid.
Hmm.
And that was the gospel until 1850, well over 2,000 years. In
Hmm.
1850, medicine kind of took more of a, hey, we've discovered germs, we've discovered bacteria. They started doing more of that and less of things based on, hey, we need to cut you open and bloodlet you. We need to keep a jar of leech. Before 1850, it was nothing to have a jar of leeches in a doctor's office because he'd put a leech on you and suck the fluid out. That was all based on, temperament. So
Wow.
while they were wrong about fluid, they're right that people have different temperaments. So it has been further and further and developed in the 80s. Dr. Richard Arno, the founder of the NCCA, really did a lot of scientific research-based study and came up with a test to find out what your temperament is. And in his research, found a fifth temperament, which is totally proven to be true. It's amazing. So there are five temperaments now. And so when you come in and you take a 60 question test, it will give you five temperaments, and there are three different areas you can have a temperament in. So a person can be a temperament in one area, a temperament in the second area, a different temperament in the third one. You get this amazing results that are it takes us an hour or more to unpack it. And so people are like, I never knew myself. I never knew what my needs are. So if you're out there and you want to schedule and you want to find out what your temperament is, you can all of a sudden start feeling nourished and more like yourself. That's where it comes
Hmm.
from.
Wow. And so I think this is important. because many of us have, and maybe you could kind of explore this for us, that many of us, I think, we seem to slap a personality on top of our temperament that more is put there to help us survive the environment around us based upon our temperament beneath the surface, more so than it actually genuinely being kind of who we are. And so, um, I know for me, one of the things that was mind blowing for me whenever I started having sessions with you was this mind blowing thing that I'm actually introverted in temperament. And it began to make sense because I get it. People see me, and even I have the Man Meets God show. What introvert wants to be on camera? And it's like it's an oversimplification, but they see robust personality, likes to be on stage and all that other type of stuff. Okay, well he's an extrovert. Well, then I look back at even my childhood, and I wanted to go hang out with friends, but I'd say no. There was just something about it that was uncomfortable for me. I hated school dances. I hated proms. I hated homecomings. I hated formal dates. I hated those things. When I went to college, this really came out, um, because I was at a university that wasn't supposed to be at, major I wasn't supposed to be in, and so I withdrew big time. And I stayed in my room most of the time, and I would occasionally venture out, and I would be very engaging, but that was probably once a week. Um, and so then getting married and then, working at a school again, it was very, I don't understand why isn't Mitch fulfilled in what he's doing, because he's out in front of students and he's on stage and he's got a, wife and a kid. And it's like, and all I wanted to do was I just wanted to be with my wife and not talk about anything. Very strange. And one of the ways in which I feel most recharged is going to the gym, but not with a gym partner. I don't want a gym partner. I want to be
Sure.
by myself. And what's interesting is when I have this alone time, not because I hate people by any means, but it's like I need this alone time to almost feel like muscles untightening, like releasing something. So, how would you say, so like what role does uh temperament have in, well, actually let me back up from that, because I was going to get ahead of myself. So we all have these different temperaments, and the temperaments underneath the personality. And so what would you say is one of the more common issues, or the most common issues that you see when people come into your office? Um, what's some of the issues that you see, and this is kind of a broad question, in relation to people being, to not knowing their temperament? Like what are the issues that come up from that?
Yeah, perfect. So the two biggest areas I'll talk about really quick are they don't know what their needs are, and then they're in an environment that doesn't facilitate their needs being met.
Mm,
And that was really what Hippocrates was dealing with way back when. So I look, I don't know as much about the Enneagram. I think there's a lot of value in the Enneagram. I know that some people think it's pagan and all that. I think that you can get some tools from it, because even people who aren't believers, if that's who came up with it, can stumble onto some truths that work. So I think
hmm
I really, really love the 16 personalities, which we refer to as the Myers Briggs. But if you think about
mm,
it as a tree, the Bible calls us trees, planted by the rivers of water. That's what we're supposed to be, is like a tree. Herein is my Father glorified that you bear much fruit, right? So I think that a lot of those personality tests, there's a lot of those things can really look at the leaves and the fruit of the tree, or they can look at
mm,
the base of the tree coming up, and so you're going to get a whole lot of value from it.
mm,
But nothing that I've found goes to the root and the environment that the tree needs, like temperament. So temperament is going
mm,
to give you what environment, what region do you need to be planted, what are the nutrients there, so that you can grow these other things.
mm,
And a lot of times, a person up here can look very extroverted. It happens all the time. And really down here, they're in an introverted root. Their roots are getting met, so that out here they flow out a little bit more extroverted. And so it can that's where the misunderstanding can happen in a test. Someone comes into my office. First thing that we unpack with temperament is a lot of them have felt shamed to have a certain temperamental need. There's a certain temperament that has to do a lot of talking outward and talking and needs a lot of assurance. And one of the reasons they need a lot of assurance is because their superpower is so far out here they can't really see themselves. It's like they don't have a mirror, so they have to talk
Mm,
all the time. Well, if you're a man and you're that temperament, that can be very shaming. We can grow up
mm,
ashamed of that. I was shamed. I'm the only one who is that temperament in my family. So
mm,
it's a family of six: my mom, dad, my three brothers, and I'm the only one. And so I got made fun of. They probably didn't feel like they were, but I felt like I was very made fun of for having to talk and ask questions and need assurance and need and a need for assurance is not a bad thing. But if you're people would say, well, John Wayne didn't need assurance, right? And
mm,
no one maybe overtly told him that. It was just, so if you don't get that need met, you're going to have very much symptoms like trauma. Trauma can present, I mean, empty tank can present like trauma. Really can. If you look,
mm,
if you're dehydrated and go to the doctor or the hospital, you're going to present like you have some other things going on. You'll hallucinate if you're dehydrated. Your body will start shutting down. So shame, being ashamed of your needs is a big one. And
mm,
so people had trauma. Well, your need as a kid, one of your needs is to be safe. And so if you weren't safe, all of a sudden, trauma can happen when things trigger you to go back into a state of fight or flight, and let's put our needs down aside and let's just run, right? When people come in, they have shame for their needs, they don't know what their needs are, and then a lot of times they're in an environment that doesn't facilitate it. You're in a two-bedroom house and you've got 10 people living with you. It's going to be hard to find some alone time, and you feel ashamed that you need it. And people may say,
mm,
why is Josh always holding up in his room or whatever? Because he's an introvert. Not I'm not, but that could be the case. If you are someone who again needs to be in a peaceful, low stakes environment, and you're a fireman or you're an ER nurse, you're in the wrong environment.
mm,
So in our culture that's barreling down the road, busy, barreling down the road to get things done and to achieve, it's you're swimming upstream a lot of times to find the environment that you need for certain temperaments to thrive. America tends to celebrate the cleric. We'll talk more about it. I'll just say it this way: two of the five temperaments America tends to celebrate.
mm. That was going to be my
Like,
next question. Is I was going to ask what that like I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but that was going to be my next
oh,
question. Is what with our culture and our society, what temperaments like do you see that there's a certain temperament that thrives better or that America is more geared towards and the rest just kind of fall to the wayside and are expected to get in line?
yeah, like this. So the cleric is that's not cleric like a clerical like clergy or something like that. This is choleric like cholera.
Mm,
The reason cholera got its name was because people were their their diarrhea was yellow, and so it's based on yellow bile. And Hippocrates, way long before cholera, theorized that yellow bile meant someone who was very driven, very entrepreneur, very go-getter. And so yellow, the Greek word for bile is cholera.
mm,
So that's how it got its name, choleric. Choleric. Well, cholerics. I mean, again, if you want to look at a classic, what I believe Donald Trump is probably a cleric. Mark Cuban, Steve Jobs, all these guys are founders, pioneers. The goal is everything. The end justifies the means because they just look everywhere and they see goals. Great vision. Clerics live on the mountaintop. They can see 10 miles away. So they're very confident. They're very driven. America celebrates those, and everyone wants to be those. Everybody, Shark Tank, that's a entrepreneur kind of an idea and a vision. That's
mm,
all a cleric. Football coach. Football coach loves getting people on a team, getting people in the right seat on the bus and everything. That's very cleric too. Sanguines are very relational people. Very, hey, let's action. Let's live where the center of activity is. And so those two temperaments tend to be celebrated. Even though we're all alive because of the introverts. We're alive because they keep us safe and reliable and dependable. we tend to kind of shame those from the comedic stand-up point of view.
Mm. What do you mean by the comedic stand-up point of view?
Oh,
If you
we're
could
a country of
articulate
sarcasm.
that.
So I think particularly that it comes from the way that we do discipline, the way that we do, very sarcastic, very tough guy. Get up, suck it up, better, just. And so anything that is funny tends to have an element of truth, or it wouldn't be funny. Wouldn't be funny if it wasn't somewhat true.
Mm.
I have a little bit I do about ladies in my family. We have to get ready to get out of the car. I just get out of the car, but they have to get ready. They have to get ready to go to bed. I just go to bed. I don't need to get ready. I'm always ready to go to bed, right? I just go to sleep. But
Yeah.
they have to spend this amount of time getting ready to go to bed, and they have to spend this time getting ready to get out of the car. And it's funny because people identify with it, but it's funny because it's also got an element of truth to it. But I'm exaggerating it, and I'm also looking down on them a little like, man, they have to get ready to get out of the car.
Mm.
A lot of correction, discipline in America is done through sarcasm, and that's shame.
Yes. Mm.
And from the pulpit, there are a lot of people who get on the pulpit and they just get start talking about mega church pastors. And you know what? They may be right. They talk about these people who are just watering down and you know what? They may be right, but you're just as guilty. Have you called
Mm.
that pastor? Have you called him and asked for a meeting so you can just sit down with him as a brother and talk to him? Or are you shaming him from your bully pulpit? See,
Mm.
that's what we do in America is we get up and we get on and we shame and I'm guilty of it, using sarcasm to get my point across to my kids or to someone. So we and stand-up comedy is alive and well, and people gravitate to it because it's funny, it's entertaining, and it's also a lot true. And so that's how we tend to get our points across, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what's interesting? I don't know if you knew this, but the word sarcasm literally means to tear flesh. That's what
Wow,
the
I
word
didn't know
means.
that.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and
Wow.
that blew my mind, and that was a subject of conversation for Kinsey and I because I mean we both can be very sarcastic, and like you said, that's kind of it. That is almost a core element of what's considered funny here in America, and really kind of in the modern West is this shame. And I understand where the impulse comes from because I think in the last probably 20 years it's almost like empathy on overdrive, and that kind of can like tip over into like codependence, and I know we could talk about that too, but so people
Sure.
think that the response is basically to just slap back with sarcasm because the thing with it is you don't have to articulate yourself and you don't have to
Right.
be empathetic. And so like sarcasm literally means to tear flesh. And so it's like, well, if I love my
Wow.
wife, why would I tear flesh verbally? Why
Yeah,
don't I just say something directly, you know? So that's kind of crazy.
it, not to interrupt you, but you're exactly right. It's a way to get your point across without having to be vulnerable.
Mm,
And so I love Brene Brown. I'm sure everyone has heard of Brene Brown. She's got some really, really good things on TED Talks, on YouTube, on Netflix. She's got some programs. She's great. She's so good. But she spent 20 years studying shame. She found
mm,
shame to be the culprit of people getting what they want out of life, and that is exactly what I see in here. The number one problem I deal with is shame. And
yes.
shame is the opposite of vulnerability. Courageous vulnerability is what she calls it. Because it's
Mm,
vulnerable to ask for what you need. It's vulnerable to have needs. It's actually more closed off to not have needs. So, a way to get your
wow.
point across without being vulnerable is to shame and to be sarcastic. And what we need more and more is manhood being celebrated as someone who's vulnerable. Because if you look
Yes.
at the mighty men of God in Genesis, if you look at Joseph, if you look at Jacob and Abraham, if you look at King David, those guys cried all the time. I
Yeah.
mean, Jacob and Esau fell on each other's neck and kissed their necks and wept. And Joseph wept so loud when his brothers were visiting him that the Egyptians were listening at the door and thought something was wrong. They were going to burst in. I mean, and any of these guys could probably kick John Wayne's butt. So
Right.
manhood being seen as something that's very guarded has been so detrimental to the men themselves, but it's also been so detrimental to their relationships with their wives and with their children. And again, hitting a lot of subjects here. One of the biggest things missing is fatherhood.
Yeah.
Again, not shaming anybody, not criticizing, but people, we get our attachment from mom, but we get our identity from dad. I'm not, again, I don't think
Yeah.
one gender is better or more valuable than the other, but the whole attachment theory stuff wasn't done on dad, it was done with mom. You get your
Yeah.
ability to attach in intimate relationships with mom, and you get your identity, which basically means the blessing that who you are is good. You get that from dad reflecting to you that you're awesome. I don't care if you're a boy who plays soccer and football and who hunts, or you're a guy who likes to cook and do art and do ballet. I love you and I think you're awesome. If people had that, we
Mm.
wouldn't have the gender and sexual identity crisis that we have today.
Wow. Wow. That's really good stuff there. So two things that I think is good. So like what you're saying is, and I think it's plainly evident, anybody who's been paying attention can see it, that the whole gender confusion and LGBTQ and just the rise of these things, that it directly correlates to the both physical, but even bigger than that, emotional absence of fathers. There are so many fathers out there who think that as long as I provide and, I don't hit you or any of those other types of things, I'm doing my job. And it's like a father's job is to reflect back to him. And that actually makes me think of when Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. The heavens opened up and God reflected back to him and said, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." Like just confirming that identity. And so, um, God, you said something that was really profound. Like you said, we're hitting on a million things, and so I want to ask like a million questions about it. Um,
One of the things that you perked up was the gender and sexual identity crisis that we have,
yeah,
because it is a crisis, and I can just comment on that briefly. If you, I said this
please.
before, if you were to break your identity down, what when we say identity, hey, my identity, what is that? Is it your name on your license? Is it your passport? But if you break it down to the smallest Lego, if you will, your needs are down there somewhere at the bottom. Your
Mm,
needs are what Mitch's need to do a podcast, his need to get the word out, his need to serve people, his need for alone time. That's what makes you you, right?
yeah.
Your need to relate to God in a certain way, and when we don't get our emotional needs met, we start losing our identity. So the kid who grew up in the house, you're clothed, you're fed, you're safe, you're welcome, or worse, maybe they weren't any of those things, but they certainly had an absence of the emotional side. And kids, particularly below the age of 7, need unconditional love, boundaries, and safety to be able to make mistakes, to be able to have emotions. But that unconditional love is reflected, their father, their parents reflecting who they are. They don't get that. They grow up into their teen years and they have this huge hole. And so they don't know who they are. And so sometimes we can latch on to, hey, this actually kind of fills the hole a little bit. A
Mm,
person, a drug does. So kids that don't get their emotional needs met, they'll do three things. Number one, they'll act out, or they will numb, or they will just push to their superpowers and they will just try to be. If they're very good at serving, they'll serve and serve. If they're good at being loyal, they'll loyal. If they're good at being faithful, if they're a young cleric, they'll start trying to be good at sports or something. And they're just running this engine and their identity is just suffering. And so they tend to latch onto something. Well, someone
mm,
who's not got their identity is going to be confused about who they are sexually and who they are gender wise. And it feels good to come out. It feels good to say, hey, I'm actually not this gender. I'm another one. See me, because then you're seen,
mm.
right? Because being seen is important. Or,
Right.
hey, I'm a different sexuality and I'm going to connect with someone over because that feels good. But again, I don't shame anybody who comes into my office who's claiming to be a different gender or have a different sexual orientation. I just don't. Does the Bible say that's sin? Yes. The answer is not
Yeah.
to shame or I just listen. I do the Dr. Phil. How's that working? Is that working for you? You know,
Mm,
usually you don't have to tell people like, no, I don't want to go back to what I was, but what I've got isn't really working. And so
right.
when we start unpacking emotional needs, we start unpacking shame, we can find healing into who we really are.
Yeah. Yeah. Dude, that's so good. That's so good. So that reminds me. So, and you were talking about this earlier, and this is what I wanted to kind of like hit on was masculinity. And one of the things that you said that I think is really powerful that just challenges this modern understanding of what we have of masculinity is that it is the John Wayne version of masculinity. And like I said, there has been and it's way more complicated than just this, but there's kind of been the empathy on overdrive and the suppression of men and treating men like their natural instincts. And this has been huge for me, is that men and kind of their natural instincts, their masculine instincts are kind of seen as more of a necessary evil. And so men have been relegated and pushed to the side. And so there's been a lot of voices that have risen up that are offering men hope. Now it's a false hope. Like that's where you get the Andrew Tates. Andrew Tate is telling young men, he's saying, screw what everybody else thinks, get jacked, make money, and flip off your haters while you're doing it. And don't get married and just, unify your flesh with as many women as possible. I mean, that's what he's saying. And young men think like, okay, yes, this is what it is. And it's not. Where reality is, what I see is that for me, well, really, you could say this across the board, but for me, what I find really freeing is I really struggled for a long time with, am I man enough? Am I man enough? And one of the things that happened is, so I'm pretty different than the people in my family. And listen, I love my family, and I know they're going to watch this, but I love my family, and I love my mom and my dad and both my brothers. Um, but one of the things that was really a joke, hitting on the sarcasm thing, that was truly just a joke, and they didn't mean anything by it, was because I was so expressive and because I feel so deeply and things move me. And I remember when I was 8 or 9 years old and our cat died, that like I would go and play music that was, in the arms of the angel. I can't remember what is that singer's name? I can't remember her.
Sarah McLaughlin.
Yes, Sarah McLachlan. Um, that I would literally I would play that so that I could feel the depth of emotion, and I would cry over our dead cat because I missed the daggum cat. And what I ended up doing, I don't think I ever told you this, was I would go to my neighbor's house when she wasn't home and sit on her back porch and play that music so I could cry in peace to
Mm.
mourn over the cat. And so what my family did when they saw these just types of, the type of music that I loved, very, deep emotional metal and all this other type of stuff, was they used to say, well, we prayed for a girl, so God gave us Mitch. We prayed for a girl, so God gave us Mitch. And, they'd laugh while they say it. And so what did this do? For 15 plus years, I really wrestled with trying to make up for what I perceived to be as a lack of masculinity, to the
Sure.
degree that we are on the Man Meets God show right now. Man Meets God was created now 6 years ago, and it started as an anonymous Instagram page where I could fully express these deep wellings of art and emotions with zero feeling of judgment. And so I remember one of the big moments that changed this was Kenzie, my wife, telling me, she's like, what, you struggle with feeling man enough? And I'm like, oh, yeah. And I really struggled. And she's like, one of the reasons I fell in love with you is because you're a man who is so expressive, right? That shocked me. And then in going through therapy with you, what I ended up realizing is a man is not a man because he looks like John Wayne. He's not a man because he's stoic and emotionless and like he's just this stone. What people are trying to pull out of that is strength. And there is something to be admired in that. But a real man is he is in tune with himself, with his God, with his bride, with the people around him. And he is expressive when he wants to be. He is authentic. He allows the emotional space for him to be able to grieve when someone is lost, to be able to celebrate when something's good, to be able to enjoy the moment. He allows himself to be the full version of God or full version of man that God made him to be, just like King David, who King David is way more masculine and way more manly than John Wayne or most people today. He was a king and he was zealous, and yet he was a poet. And he was a beautiful poet and a beautiful writer. So, what would you say, like, how, like, if we could, like, just define it, what is biblical masculinity? What is it?
Yeah, that's great. And so I will tell you from the perspective, obviously, that I know there are other people that we mutually know, that are a lot better Bible scholars on that than I am. I know that the Hebrew meaning of father means to be the one that covers, like a tent, like the big tent pole. But what I see is that people are designed. Some people are designed, hardwired to be a little more stoic. Some a little more expressive, both men and women. Some people are designed to be a little bit more alone, a little bit more relational. Some people talk a little more, some people talk a little less, and that's okay. What makes a man in his role relationally is to reflect the image of God to people. Again, I'm not trying to be gender biased here because I don't think one's better than the other. One has more value than the
Right.
other.
Of course not.
Again, we get our in if you're talking about gender wise parents, mom and dad, we get our connection, ability to connect to people from mom, our attachment, and we get our reflection of who we are from dad. So a man is
Mm,
someone who is confident in who he is and is able to reflect to others who they are, an encourager, someone who is an influencer, and therefore someone who is an influence and a reflector to other people. They tend to be the ones who tend to be tasked to lead if we have to storm the beaches
mm,
of Normandy or if we have to get to Oregon. Again, I don't think that makes them more valuable as a person. I don't think that women can't have positions of authority. I don't, but just men tend to be, again, ones who are tasked with the influence of people,
mm,
and whether they're artsy and ballet or whether they're a football player and a hunter.
mm,
You influence. The stats are in that kids tend to go the way of their dad more than their mom. There was a
mm,
stat about people who attend church. Well, people tend to attend church. 83% of people whose dad attend church will attend church as they get to be adults. Only 17% of people who only the mom attend church will attend church after they get to be adults. There are other
mm,
stats out there that show the influence of a father. Again, I'm probably qualifying and apologizing too much for this and the environment we're in politically here. But
right.
a, a dude, if you will, just has a lot of it. So influence. And so we've equated manhood to dominance, which
Hmm.
is an overworking of influence. We've
Mm,
created manhood to self-control, which in certain places a man should be able to have a little self-control so he can better lead and influence others. But at the same time, of course, you should reflect what healthy emotions are, and of course, you should be able to be you. It's this superpower gone overboard. And that's what
mm,
happens a lot of times. We I use Superman. Superman is awesome, but if he never gets to be Clark Kent, he never gets to connect with people. And sometimes we're so much Superman that Clark Kent gets further and further in the rearview mirror. And
mm.
so we can't shame Superman because we wanted Clark Kent. And you can't
Wow.
shame men. It doesn't do any good we talk about toxic masculinity. Well, a lot of those traits are actually good. They're just going too much. It's just Superman too much, and it just needs to calm down a little bit.
Ooh. Mm,
It's not going to do good to shame someone's superpower because it was going overboard, because then they'll lose their identity
wow.
too.
Wow. So each temperament, generally speaking, every person for sure, but generally speaking, each temperament has a certain set of superpowers. So, for example, one person may have a temperament that allows for them to thrive in a high stress environment, like you've said. So, that would make them a really good firefighter, or somebody who, like a police officer, who has to be up all hours of the night. Whereas somebody else may be somebody who is more artistic and expressive, or any other number of things that allows for them to be they lean into that particular area. And so, not to unify masculinity around it must look like this, like John Wayne, or it must look like this over here, but rather everybody has different superpowers. And so, we can't hate Superman, or yeah, we can't shame and hate Superman and celebrate Clark Kent for how he's such a good, genuine guy and he's friendly to everybody in the office. And then we can't shame and hate Clark Kent and only celebrate Superman and expect everybody to be Superman. It's like everybody has superpowers, but they also need the space for their emotional needs to be filled, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. For sure.
That's
Well
awesome.
said.
Cool. So, well, then
Yeah.
on that note, I know we're kind of brushing up against our time limit here, but there's still a few things that I want to ask. Um, so like from your experience, so you just opened a third location. So you're by no means no small time counselor who goes and just meets a few people at coffee shops on the weekend. No disrespect, I'm not calling anybody out specifically, but this is your full time thing. This is what you do. You just opened a third location. So that's a lot of experience. That's a lot of people that you've talked to. And so you've counseled a ton of different temperaments from a ton of different types of families, different careers, different dynamics and experiences and traumas and so on. From your experience, what seems to actually, before I say that, let me tee that up with this. Men's mental health, part of the reason that I started this show was that men's health, emotional health, and mental health has just cratered in the last 20 years. And specifically since 2010, to the degree I've talked about this before, that men are more likely to take their own life by 4 times as much as women. And so for every one woman that takes her life, there are 4 men who take their lives. To the
Sure.
degree now where if you just take all those additional men, so not even just eliminate all of the suicides, but just the additional men who take their lives over the average rate that women have. If you took all of them, since 2000, you could fill Michigan's football stadium called the Big House. You could fill it 5 times with all of those lost men. So, so these men, those lost additional men for the record. So for
Sure.
some reason, men are suffering at extremely high rates in the last 20 years. So with your experience, and the fact that your resume just speaks for itself. You're somebody who people such as myself go to because you have this particular gifting. What are the most common emotional struggles that you see men facing today, and why do you think that they're so prevalent?
Great question. It's a little more socially acceptable for females to express emotions and have emotional needs than it is for men in our culture, as the bottom line. And so, therefore, needs unmet and needs shamed tend to be result in us getting to be adults and we're not getting our needs met. And just an empty tank, you start losing your identity. You start losing your sense of purpose. Like, what is it even worth? What's even the point of this? You know,
Hmm.
um, why even go on? It's just more going to be more of the same. That's kind of the definition of depression. What is the point?
Hmm.
As children, it seems to be a little more acceptable for women, girls, to have a little bit more of the emotions that tend to make us healthy, and men need to be, like you say, stoic, need to tough it up, suck it up. You got to lead, which they're not wrong. Like we talked about, men tend to be more influential. They tend
Hmm.
to, and gone into unhealthy, we expect them to just be in control and dominate and all this, and then not ever have any needs, right? We want them to be Superman all the time. Who's this nerdy guy with glasses that works at the Daily Planet? We want that guy in the cape back. We want Superman.
Hmm.
And so what happens is boys grow up and everybody wants them to be Superman all the time. Because as a kid, that's how they got their needs met. Now this happens for girls too. I got my needs met because I was Superman. Well, guess what? Superman doesn't have any needs. He's always the hero, and people get mad at you. People will get mad at you, blame you, come at you if you stop being Superman. I kind of love
Hmm.
some of the the more recent superhero movies, which started showing superheroes with a little more emotions, a little less John Wayne-ish,
Yes.
and how even in the Avengers, how the public turned on them for not being perfect all the time. Of course, in that movie, there was a lot of destruction caused by the Avengers. But the point being, we expect certain people. We tend to want relationships where someone's always our hero.
Mm.
And that has to do with our relationship with ourselves. A lot of people don't know that they need to have a relationship with ourselves. We can talk about that otherwise. But so men are growing up and they're always feeling like they have to be the hero. And
Mm.
then they're ashamed that they should even have emotions.
Mm.
And shame is, again, the number one thing we deal with in here, because if you're ashamed of your emotions, you can't just say, "Oh, don't be ashamed of them," like that.
Yeah.
It takes a while to heal from that belief. Um,
Mm.
which kind of brings back to just this may sound a little off topic. I'm going to throw back to what you said about what the Bible says about anxiety. Cast your anxieties on the Lord. Cast your worry, on the Lord. Well, the word where Jesus was talking about, don't worry about your life, what you'll eat, what you'll sleep, and then in 1 Peter 5:7, casting all your cares upon the Lord. 1 Peter 4:6, be anxious for nothing. But I was at a point where if someone quoted Philippians 4:6 one more time, I was going to just choke them. Like, you don't
Mm-hmm.
think I've tried to not be anxious? Well, you can't cast emotions on the Lord,
Mm.
but you can cast responsibility. So the word there, if you kind of study what the word for anxieties and the word for cares and the word for worries is, actually taking the responsibility of it. Well, I'm going to cast, you can cast the responsibility over on the Lord. Lord, you're my provider.
Mm.
But if I'm anxious, I can't just cast that emotion on the Lord.
Mm.
We have to say, okay, why am I see, anxiety is fight or flight. Why am I in fight or flight? Well, there's a belief somewhere I'm seeing a bear in the woods.
Yeah.
So you can't just change beliefs just like that.
Yeah.
If we could, we'd be a paper bag in the wind, like Katy Perry says. Have you ever felt like a paper bag in the wind? So
Mm.
it takes a while to change your beliefs, because your beliefs are your identity too. That's your spiritual identity is made up of your beliefs. So that is why we have to go to counseling. And probably, maybe, I think God always intended for there to be counselors, but it should be at least something we find in community. But see, you don't have time for community in survival mode. You don't have time for
Mm.
marriage. Marriage on the Oregon Trail, it doesn't work unless there's just a male dominating a woman and she's just kind of
Mm-hmm.
a servant. That's one of the reasons we've had that hierarchy in America, is it just works in survival mode.
Mm.
But marriages don't thrive in survival mode. And a lot of people have trouble in their marriage and their relationships. Relationships don't tend to thrive unless you're actually sitting and resting. And so if in your community, you're able to find someone to reflect back who you are and kind of transform your beliefs, then we can deal with shame. But so people come to
Mm-hmm.
me, and it takes a while to reflect and to change beliefs and to unpack it, because you can have beliefs and not even know you have them. They're way down
Wow.
there so far you don't even know why you believe something. You don't even know you did believe it.
Mm.
So again, back to where I started before I went on all these rabbit trails, was number one thing that I see from men is they're either don't know their needs, or they're ashamed of their needs and feel the pressure to always be the Superman.
Wow. Wow. So, in your observation and your kind of like your diagnosis, one of the, if not the driving reason that men have been opting to make this decision. And obviously there's a lot of things that play into this. There's socioeconomic stuff, there's, you know, a general moral and spiritual decline, and divorce rates are at 50% and so on and so forth. There's all those things. But in your analysis, if we can kind of like, if we could solve this, then we could make a huge impact. It's that men men don't know who they are. They don't know what their needs are, and they feel the pressure to always be John Wayne Superman. And eventually they reach a point where it breaks.
Right.
Right? Is
Absolutely.
that, am I summarizing, like, am I saying that correctly? Or would you add on anything to
100%.
that?
100%.
Yeah.
If your car motor is running at 9,000, 10,000 RPM all the time, it's going to break down. It's not designed to do
Mm.
that. It can for a little while, but it'll break down. And
Wow.
that's what we're seeing happen.
Wow. That's a really good analogy that you just used there, because scripture says that the glory of a young man is his strength.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Proverbs says. And I know that Proverbs is general advice, not something necessarily to grab on hold of each and every single
Right.
little word, but it says that the glory of a young man is his strength. And that doesn't mean the more you can bench press, the more glory that it's like. No, it's kind of like a resilience a little bit. And so that strength manifests itself in a different way for each person. But so if you were to take that analogy of the car that you were talking about, I may be, as a truck, while my wife is a BMW, I may be able to tow more, you could say, pull more weight. My wife's more like a Lamborghini, and I'm a broken down 1989 Toyota pickup. So I may be able to ram that RPM all the way up and just pull that weight. But if I drive that motor hard day after day after day, I'm going to break down when I get to 100,000 miles. And at that point, because I've been neglecting for 100,000 miles, there's going to be a lot of extensive repair. And so some
Absolutely.
people may end up just looking at the car and say, we just need to toss the whole thing out and get a newer model. Whereas reality is,
Absolutely.
if we actually take care of the truck, it'll serve you a long time.
Yeah, and so there's even more of a natural response to this. So spiritually, if you don't get your spiritual needs met, you're going to tend to your energy and everything's going to continue. If you don't get your physical needs met, nourishment, shelter, safety, you know, you're going to go down like this. It's the opposite with our emotional needs. There's a
Mm.
natural tendency that if our emotional needs aren't met, we tend to go this way. Our motor tends to start to run. It's like the sports car, to use the analogy, is made to barrel down the road. It cuts through the air like a knife through butter, but that's not filling its tank. So if its tank gets on empty, it tends to say, "Whoa, I got to floor it and get to the gas station." You know, so we tend to compensate for empty tanks in our emotions with going overboard. Overboard to connect, or if we're a different temperament, overboard to be alone. Overboard to
Mm.
hit goals, overboard for peace. You find people like, peace, peace. Hey, we need peace. Quit arguing. Quit. Well, they're probably a certain temperament that needs peace, so they're just pushing for that so much.
Mm.
And the more that we're just going like this, the more it tends to break down the hardware.
Wow. Wow. That's really good stuff. So, I know we're up kind of against our limit here, but I wanted to ask you just one more question, and
Sure.
that would be, what there's a lot of people who may be listening. They're hearing temperament for the first time. There's some men who, therapy, what the heck is that? Therapy is for weak people or whatever. And it's like, listen, let me say something to the men out there. Um, if therapy was for weak people, then, well, that's just a stupid belief, because it's not true. Reality is that one of the markers of strength is being courageous enough to face things that you don't want to face. And be sure that there was a lot of things that Josh stood next to me as we looked at something, and I'm like, I really don't want to look at this. And he's like, we have to. We got to look at this. And so that process was very empowering, and also it brought a ton of healing, but also a ton of confidence in myself. So, but that aside, there's a lot of people who may be listening who they may be struggling or not even know that they're struggling. And so, I guess, what would you say for the listeners? What do they need to watch out for? What are the symptoms of, okay, I'm redlining this. I'm pushing the engine too hard, or this is a bit of a red flag of I'm running on fumes, or I'm out of alignment with my temperament. I'm in a job that does not suit my temperament at all. What are those red flags? And then what do they need to do once they recognize those red flags?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Let me address counseling just for a second, if because you made a really good
Please,
point, and I'll answer
please.
that question. Um, I would have never gone to counseling unless I'd hit bottom, because it was shamed. We were shamed for going to counseling. It was like, oh my gosh, even my dear mother said, "Oh, Josh, it just makes me feel like I've failed you that you have to go to counseling." I don't know if you remember when I was in second, third grade, there were kids that would have to be pulled out of class in front of everybody and walk the
Hmm.
walk of shame down to the remedial reading room because they didn't know how to read and they should know how to read. So
Hmm.
going to counseling is like trying to learn something you should know how to learn, right?
Hmm.
And nothing could be further from the truth than that. Counseling is more like uh, a, being fathered, being mentored, being coached, being someone reflecting and building. So remember when I told you, because you asked me about what then is manhood? It's the person who reflects your value. That really is it. The one who covers and who says this you're safe and this is who you are. Um, yes, I do feel like I'm very good at what I do. I feel like that there's been a lot of success. Um, some of the one thing that I hear from people, and I don't say this to pat myself on the back or anything like that, but the number one thing I hear from people is, Josh, it's almost like you're the dad I never had.
Hmm.
Why am I that? What about me is that? I reflect because I tell people from number one, my number one job is not to fix you because you're probably not broken. I don't make decisions for people. That's not my job to do, or to
Yeah.
tell you that you're sinning or you're wrong or anything. My job is to reflect who you are. And that's what God does. We're transformed by Him by renewing our mind and who we are. Uh, uh, um, in the face, right? We're changed from glory to glory as we behold the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
So the fellowship is reflecting that unconditional love. Unconditional love is not a feeling; it's a reflection of your value of who you are. So that's what a
Wow.
counselor should give you tools, of course, tell you who your which temperament is, what trauma. Yeah, absolutely. Now, what symptoms should you look for right now that um, tell you need counseling? If you're breathing and alive, you need counseling. I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
You need to come get your temperament taken. Just obviously, if you do, but
Hmm.
anxiety. If you're stuck in anxiety, go to someone a counselor who knows how to reflect who you are. Okay. If you are stuck in depression, go to. If you are stuck with um, insomnia and stress, those are big ones. But another one is if you are struggling in your relationships,
Hmm.
couples that they're a little more challenging because they're just convinced that 98% of the problem is their relationship, and usually it's not.
Hmm.
Usually, relationships are the thing that pushes on that old pain. And the when someone comes to me and they sit on my couch and they say, Josh, I've never in my life felt the anxiety, depression, whatever that I'm having right now. The first question I ask them is, how old's your kid?
Hmm.
Because there's nothing that makes you start coming to the surface like your kid being to the age that you were when trauma happened. The second thing is, when did you recently get into an intimate relationship?
Hmm.
Because when you're intimate with someone, it presses on old pain. And I'll just use this analogy really quick. Trauma is like this. If I were to slug you on the arm, probably wouldn't hurt you. It may hurt for a day. If I were to slug you on the arm and hit shrapnel from a bomb that went off 10 years ago, not only would it hurt times 1,000, but you would relive the bomb going off. The problem is, you usually don't know you're reliving the bomb going off. You're like, it's you, Josh, you hit me. So
Yeah.
people get into intimate relationships and shrapnel's being hit, and they think it's about the thing, and it is. You hit me, but it shouldn't cause me to react like 1,000. I'm reacting like
Wow.
1,000 because I'm reliving an old pain. So if you find yourself elevated and going up into here a lot because of work, because of relationships, because of your kids, come
Yeah.
come to come to counseling.
Wow. What a, see, I don't know what the iteration for Josh would be. We have Kate the Great. I don't know what Josh would be. Josh the Boss. I don't know. That doesn't really work, but just something. We got to come up with something because again, I love that analogy that you used of shrapnel. And it just made me think of the fact that, I mean, yeah, listen, there's different temperaments and personalities and experiences, and so some things may, impact me more deeply than it may impact you. But if somebody comes up and pats you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, how you doing, buddy?" and you've got shrapnel in that arm, it's going to feel like you just got shot. And what
Right.
we do in our modern culture and society is we look at the person who's being patted as it was just a pat. Get over it. You're weak.
Right.
When reality is that deep pain is a symptom of something embedded in that flesh. If you could just, it's, you're not weak. You're not a less capable person. You're just somebody who you've got some shrapnel in there and you need a professional to pull it out. And so same way with the
Absolutely.
emotions, that there may be a one situation that it doesn't impact your spouse or your girlfriend or whoever. It doesn't impact them the way it impacts you because they don't have that shrapnel in their emotional arms, so to speak, like you do, because you had something happen.
For sure. And look, that makes me think of another symptom you asked for, addiction. Guys,
Mm,
the answer for addiction is not willpower and gritting your teeth and white knuckling it. Although sometimes when you are addicted to more dangerous things, you do need to go into a program. Okay. You do need to go into inpatient sometimes. But if you have addiction, the root of that is not you're not a man and you're not strong enough. The root of that is a long time you tried to compensate for trauma or an empty tank. You do not have to live in addiction.
wow.
If you get your needs met, you don't have to quit addictions, they will quit you. So
Yeah.
yes,
Wow.
there is some willpower. Like even now, I have to sometimes like, oh yeah, that I can see that temptation pulling me, but I don't have to use it. It's just the little motor on the front of the boat to get me corrected, because I'm like, no, that's I don't need that anymore. My tank is full. Right. So
Yeah.
you don't have to live in emotional pain, guys. You do not have to live in emotional pain because you're probably not broken. I know you're not broken and you're not flawed. You're just empty or wounded, and emptiness can be filled and wounds can heal.
Mm,
So don't wait to go to counseling. You can
yes.
have fulfilling and fruit-filled life that you've always wanted.
Amen. Amen. Well, so Josh, if anybody's watching this, who feels that they're ready to take that next step, I would just first of all recommend you number one, first round overall draft pick. I would tank my team to get you on my team.
Thank you.
Tank for Josh. That's what I would do. It's a football reference for those of you who don't know. Um, how can they get in contact with you, find more about you? And I think you said that you offer a temperament test. Just how they can take that next step.
Yeah. So you can go to my website, dr for doctor, drjoshwilliams.com, drjoshwilliams.com, and just click on the book now, and it'll take you right to the client portal where you can manage your own scheduling and all of that. If you just want to go to my website, drjoshwilliams.com, drjoshwilliams.com, and just find my cell phone number is on there. You can text or call me. I am not limited by state lines. I can counsel anywhere in most every state. There's 5 states that don't allow it, but most every state I can, and anywhere else in the world. So a lot of my clients, I would say about 50% are still by video. If you're in the Norman, Oklahoma area and you want to come in person, that's great too. But we can get you a temperament test. A lot of people charge as much as 75 or $100. I just wrap that in as part of the benefit to you if you counsel with me. So that we can give that to you and even your children. Anyone who's over 7 years old can take that test. It's your lives will change when you realize the temperament of everyone in your family. Believe me. And so yeah, go online, book today, call or text me, and we'll get you set up.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. I also want to say as a last closing thing that I think you do incredible work. And so I also think it's great that you're in the mission field of Oklahoma where all those people suffering from a 6-6, actually 6-7 football season coming to you for some grief.
A lot of
Um,
therapy
I,
going on. A lot of
I can't
depression.
say much. Heartbreaking loss to Ohio State. Just I turned my
Yeah.
phone off for 24 hours. You want like I had to actually grieve. I had to actually. I'm like this feels so
Of
stupid.
course.
I have to
Yeah.
actually grieve this football loss as
Yeah.
if it's as if I'm on the team. But Josh, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your great
Mark.
work that you're doing. The Lord is clearly blessing your work. And I know that I've been personally blessed by how much you have helped me and my family and just the freedom that you bring. You are a sledgehammer of freedom that the Lord
Yeah.
uses to break bondage off. And so we're definitely going to do this again. I hate that we're out of time, but maybe I need to venture on up to Norman and we can sit down and have a more long form 3 hour discussion because I could talk about this for days.
Me too. I love it. Love to have you. Thank you, Mitch. You're awesome. This is going to be a very successful podcast, I know. So you're just a great, amazing, authentic, refreshing, and people are looking for that. And so I know it's going to. I'm honored to be the first one. So
Yes, sir.
anytime.
First time again. All right. Thanks,
Yeah.
Josh.
See you.